Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and we're cutting in on this testimony because we have a very special interview this afternoon. We have with us today the daughter of one of the victims of the Golden State Killer. Her name is Debbie Domingo McMillan. Her mother, Sherry Domingo, was killed by the Golden State Killer, and Debbie's here to talk to us a little bit about that. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm grateful.
It's truly a pleasure. And then we also have one of our frequent guests, Stacey Honowitz, who is a sex crimes prosecutor, an attorney, and is here to speak to us about all the issues throughout the afternoon. Stacey, thanks so much for coming back on with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Great to be here, Heather. Hi, Debbie. Nice to have you.
Debbie, I want to start.
Thank you.
I want to start right away with you. I know you're taking a break. You're in your work day, and you've been nice enough to extend us some of your time. And so the first thing that I want to ask you, because we focus so much on this terrible man and what he's done, and the first thing I want to ask you about is tell our audience about your mom.
My mom was the best adjective I can use for her is vibrant. She was only 35 when she was killed, but she had me at a very young age. So she and I, when I was 15, she was 35. We'd be out in public, we'd be out at dinner, or we'd be shopping for clothing, and I'd say, "Hey, Mom," and all the heads would turn. She'd order a glass of wine at dinner, and she'd get asked for her identification, and I would be like, "What? She's my mom. What's wrong with you?" So. She just had a very young energy about her. She loved the outdoors, and she loved to stay fit. So it wasn't unusual for us to spend time walking on the beach or riding a bicycle. She liked to stay tan. She always had a good tan.
She's gorgeous. I mean, we just showed some pictures of her in her youth, and what a lovely, lovely woman. She was shown with a man, and I believe that was the man that was also killed at that time, Gregory Sanchez. Was that your mom's boyfriend at the time?
Yes, they had dated off and on for the better part of about 4 years. So as far as I was concerned, Greg was part of the family. He was younger than her. He was 7 years younger than she was. So he didn't come into the kind of I want to be your stepfather kind of a role. He was just a good guy, and we were very, very close. I loved Greg, and my memories now. Of course, when someone passes, you don't ever remember the bad stuff. You always remember the good. But what I remember that's good is that any time that my mom and Greg were together, there's this soundtrack that just plays in my head forever of Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles and Chicago and all those great 70s kind of easy listening pop kinds of music. It was just a time in our lives that was pretty carefree.
Yeah. And you were away when your mom and Greg were murdered, isn't that right? You got a call and had to come home to a crime scene, really.
That's correct. I got a call, and the call said pretty much, you have to come home now. Something's happened. It's important. And I did. And when I got there, there was yellow tape everywhere, and the police cars and the news cameras and neighbors standing around whispering and trying to figure out what was going on. So it was very surreal.
Now,
very surreal.
Over the years, you were, I think, 15 years old at that time. And over the years, there has sort of been a waving investigation. There was a push, and then there was a period of time where the investigation seemed a little bit quiet. What was your involvement in the investigation into the identity of your mother's killer over those years?
The first 20 years was virtually nothing. And I know that sounds really weird, but that, initially they had very little to go on. It seemed like a random crime. They talked about, maybe ex-boyfriends or enemies, or, they interrogated my father, bless his heart. You always look at the ex-husband.
Right.
And then very quickly they ran out of leads. So I stopped hearing and I never really did hear very much because I was a child. But I kept waiting for a call that would say, "Oh, we've got something really interesting. We're gonna find this out." And I never heard that call. So So I spent about 20 years just thinking, yeah, it's never going to be solved. It's done and over with. It's history. And about 2001, they started putting together the connections between the rape series and the other murders, which I had never heard of. 2001 was my first introduction to the series, and from there it's been this gradual snowball for me. Significant for me in particular was 2011. Retired detectives came back into Santa Barbara County Sheriff's, which was our department, and they went into the original evidence boxes and extracted new DNA samples that did conclusively link my mom and Greg's case into the rest of the series. So for me, from 2011 till now has just been huge, lots of activity.
And Stacey, I mean, Debbie makes a really interesting point. The DNA evidence in these types of crimes and the types of crimes you deal with, it is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really is amazing. It's a fingerprint. You know, everybody's DNA is different and unique, of course, other than identical twins. So when you have DNA in a case, it's rock solid unless the defense can somehow prove there's contamination, cross-contamination, tampering, things of that nature. But other than that, if you have DNA in a case, you know, that kind of evidence that you can go in front of a jury and say it's 99.999% his, it's great.
Yeah, it's, Stacey, given that you spend so much of your life pursuing these cases, prosecuting these cases, I know you've written books about how to deal with these cases. When you saw news about the Golden State Killer and he having been a rapist as well, that he had been actually caught, what was your first reaction? And then I'm going to ask the same of you, Debbie.
Well, you know, like anybody else, you know, thrilled that finally the case is done. You know, they have somebody in custody and they know what happened. But, you know, this DNA and these links in these series are all the things that investigators now that have cold cases, that's exactly what they're doing. I'm sure you've heard about rape kits that have been sitting in warehouses, all the whole rape, you know. So this is what we're on right now. We are on kind of a mission for a lot of cold cases to pull out the DNA. We have CODIS, which is the cross DNA banks all over the nation now. And certainly things like this, we are always advancing in technology, and that technology always helps us solve criminal cases. So I'm sure Debbie felt the same way, just like everybody. It'd be abnormal not to feel like finally, you know, we have somebody in custody.
Debbie, where were you when you received word that they had found the man that they think had murdered your mother?
I was actually in my recliner with my laptop, where I spend a good majority of my time. And it was near midnight on Tuesday night. The arrest had already been made, but the news had not broken yet. And I received a call from an official source who said, "We got him."
And what was your first response?
You know, I had heard little rumors throughout the evening, and I found it kind of hard to believe, and I was waiting to hear from an official source. So when I got that call, I was just really, really relieved that it was true, because, you know, we've been pushing for this for so long, and I've been, you know, hearing people say, "Oh, you're never going to find him," or, "Oh, if you do figure out who it was, he's probably dead already anyway." So when I was told we've got him, my first question was, "He's alive?" And the answer was yes. We have the DNA. He's alive and he's in custody. So
why was that your first question?
I just felt this
Debbie,
wave of relief.
Sorry to interrupt you. Why was that your first question? That's interesting to me. Why did you want to know whether he was alive or found dead?
I don't know. I guess it's just because, you know, having those two different alternatives for me personally, you know, we've got two different routes to go. If he was already dead, what the next steps would be very different than what we're seeing now. Right now, we're seeing investigation and prosecution getting ready to, you know, trying to coordinate and figure out how they're going to do this. And I don't know. It just changed everything for me. I needed to know which of those routes we were on.
And do you plan to continue to participate, to go to the court hearings, to go to the various parts of the trial if it gets to that point?
Absolutely.
Stacey,
absolutely. I need to be in that courtroom, and I need to look him in the eye.
Yeah, it's.
I think that's. Yeah, I think that's. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think when you ask that question of whether or not it's important whether they're dead or alive, I think to Debbie's point, it's I want to be present. I want to be there,
Right.
and if he was dead, it's almost like, okay, so they got him. You know, not to say a big deal, but so what? Now we have him, but he's dead, and there's nothing for me to look at, to pursue, to watch prosecution. And now she has that ability to attend every hearing, be instrumental in any kind of investigation that the detectives might want to deal with her and talk to her about, and kind of be in on the action and to see justice finally be served.
Now, there's been a lot of...
If I could,
go ahead, Debbie, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt?
Absolutely.
I hate to interrupt.
No, interrupt away.
I'm really glad that he's alive, because if he was dead, that would leave us with thousands of unanswered questions. And now we have the opportunity to learn more about what really happened. My biggest fear is actually that we're going to learn of more crimes that have never been reported. I'm scared to find out how many others he raped that never reported, or if they did report, it just didn't get connected to the series. I'm scared to find out if there are more bodies that are attributed smaller. But have that opportunity, and that gives me hope. You know, so many people are ready for closure, and I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up. Many people attribute the fact that he was finally found to Michelle McNamara's recent New York Times best-selling book on this topic. And I think she ends that book with questions she would want to ask of him. Debbie, what would your questions be if you had the opportunity to ask him questions? Do we have Debbie, or has she?
Pretty much what I just covered. I want to know who else. I want to know who else has been affected by this. What else did you do that we don't know about? That's what I want to know.
Stacey, there's been a lot of talk, and our own host here at Law&Crime Network, Aaron Keller, wrote a really phenomenal piece on this on the website. If you have the opportunity to read it, I recommend you do so, about the way that he was caught and the use of the DNA in this genealogy website to sort of do a very broad, to say the least, search of that website, and whether or not that evidence is ultimately going to be admitted. Have you had the opportunity to sort of consider that, and what are your thoughts on the use of these types of websites to make these types of arrests, and to see whether or not this case can be seen all the way through to fruition?
Well, it is very interesting, and I don't think there have been a lot of cases that have used the websites, the genealogy. So it is probably going to be kind of a case of first impression, but certainly if the prosecution can show the reliability, that it could be used in the scientific community, and that if experts can testify as to the veracity of these types of websites and why people now are going on these websites to try to figure out what their backgrounds are, I think that the prosecution will be okay with this DNA. It's always, difficult when you're dealing with that kind of biological forensic evidence. This might be an additional hoop that they have to go through, but I think that they will be successful in getting the evidence in.
Yeah, the thing that seems to be more of a concern to me is not so much whether or not the science is yet to the point where it's admissible, but whether or not the search was unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. And that's something that I think viewers need to continue to watch on. Debbie, has anyone raised that issue to you? Any person who's in a position of authority raised the issue that is one of the things that they expect the defendant to argue against in this case?
I think all of our prosecutors are smart enough to know that, of course, it's going to be questioned. Of course, it's going to be questioned, and I think that they're prepared to answer that. So I trust that they're going to handle that in the right ways.
Debbie, it's amazing to see your strength as you've dealt with a lifetime of sort of questions and unknowing, and I'm sure terror-filled nights. What do you think has gotten you through this, and what do you think will get you through this next phase of going to court and facing him, hopefully, and maybe even being able to look him eye to eye? What's going to sort of bring all that together for you?
Thank you for asking. I'm asked often, how do you survive this? How do you process? And the only thing I can say is the love of my Lord and the support and love of my family. I have prayed earnestly for years and years and years, please let us a solution to this. And I heard a song maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and it came on the radio, and it's called Miracle. And it said, don't give up on the miracle. Pray until your breakthrough breaks through the ceiling. And I've been singing that song over and over again every day for the last 4 months. And my breakthrough broke through the ceiling.
Yeah. It really is a miracle for so many of you. I had the opportunity to meet another victim last week, and she had the exact same response, that it was her faith that got her through. And, you know, it's very, it gives a lot of people hope, I think, not just people who have had crimes committed with uncaught killers, uncaught rapists, but also just people who think that something is impossible, because it comes out that this was possible when so many people believed that it wasn't. I know, Debbie, that you need to get back to your office, and we want to thank you so much for being here with us and sharing a little bit about your mother, because I think it's important to focus on not only this terrible human being, but the wonderful woman that she was as well. So thank you so much, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you covering this now. You'll stick with us. I hope I get to see you again.
Absolutely. Well, you're welcome back anytime, Debbie. Thank you very much.
Good luck, Debbie.
Thanks.
Stacey, I want to talk to you a little bit about something that you brought up when we were talking to Debbie, and that's the rape kits, because I don't know that we've had as much of a discussion about that as I would like to. There are, and you'll know these numbers far better than I do, but across the United States, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of untested rape kits. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there's a huge amount that we're figuring out now that have never been dealt with.
So that is important, because all of those untested rape kits could in fact contain DNA evidence that would link to someone, so that those perpetrators would be able to be caught if only those kits were tested. Is that right?
Right. I mean, look, you're dealing now with a very big issue, a big problem, wanting to know why police officers didn't do it. Prosecutors want to know from way back why it wasn't done. And, you know, there are reasons why the police say that some of the kits went untested. Certainly, if you had a victim, if she didn't want to go forward, you know, and we're talking way back, but if she didn't want to go forward, if she knew the identity of the perpetrator and she didn't want to go forward, then the police, I think, have this attitude that why are we going to go forward and test it and go through the issues of testing it? Because we have a victim that doesn't want to go forward, or the victim knows the identification of the person. You have to remember that also back then, we didn't have the central data banks, the CODIS hits that we could have now. You know, we had a data bank in the county that you were living in, but we didn't have it cross country. Now we do. Now I'm trying to make an excuse for it not being tested. I'm just trying to tell the viewers why, if these issues come up, and they will come up because there are big movements now to get them tested, as they should be. These are some of the reasons why I think the police officers saying that we didn't go forward back at that time.
Yeah, there's a huge push now to sort of take care of that problem. I know even in California, where the Golden State Killer was caught, there's a bill pending that says that from here forward, every test has got to be tested. Because, you know, the thought, and you can speak to this far better than I can, but the thought that you have a victim go through the trauma of having the kit actually done and the testing actually done after having been assaulted, and then just to have it sit there, it sort of really hits at your sense of justice and your sense of what's appropriate and your sense of what's kind and fair. So moving forward, I guess it's a state-by-state issue as to whether or not how these kits get tested. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're seeing now. There's a huge movement to get this done. I think Mariska Hargitay, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's of the Joyful Heart Foundation. She's, you know, very instrumental in getting this done. And you're right. You know, if you have a victim who has been severely traumatized, and we know that in rape cases, the victims are severely traumatized, and you think to yourself that my case is being investigated, only to find out years later that it hasn't been investigated, will certainly, you know, the feelings of helplessness, the trauma is only reinvigorated pretty much, because no one did anything for me. You know, in some cases where you have unknown suspects, sometimes the victim will realize that maybe the person, as Debbie might have thought at one time, is never going to be found. But if you know that you have legitimate evidence that needs to be tested, that could link to somebody that has done this to you, then it's a horrible feeling. So that's why the push is there. So many victims, and we've had some cases, we've heard about some cases where the rape kit has been tested years later, and it has linked somebody, where a prosecution has then gone forward, and that's the hope and the anticipation now. Now, the manpower and the funds all have to be there, because testing and labs it's not done for free.
Right.
And so you have to think of all those things that go into kind of investigating a case. It does cost money to investigate a case, and that's not to say that we should kind of downplay it, but all these things have to factor in once this push for these kits to be tested is taken on.
And Stacey, you mentioned the Joyful Heart Foundation, and that is a foundation that speaks to these issues and has been pushing for a very long time to ensure that these rape kits are tested. I think you said it perfectly, where you said it almost doesn't give these women a voice for a second time, because now they've given this evidence, sometimes in a very intimate way, and now the evidence is just sitting there. So it's certainly something that, as we watch, especially the Golden State Killer issue in that case, recognizing that there are untested kits that may help us find similar perpetrators is certainly worth the discussion. Stacey, I'm so happy to have you on with us, especially today, because this case that we're covering now, Ohio versus Sean Great, is right up your alley. As you watch the testimony in this case, and in just a minute we're going to show the testimony of the surviving victim, who actually was the one to escape and call the police and lead to the recovery of the bodies of the women who have been killed. Is it similar to the cases that you hear day in, day out?
Well, certainly I hear about horrible rapes, and our homicide unit handles the cases where there is a death, subsequent to the rape. But these are the types of things that you do see. The case that you're looking at right now and that your viewers are watching, is probably a case that could have been played out on any television show. I mean, it is truly theater. And because it is true, and it's what happened, that the theater and the TV shows grab from the headlines, like in a case like this. So you hope that your jurors are paying very close attention, and I'm sure that they are. You're listening to the survivor, who's going to tell them exactly what led to the, how they found this guy, how they found the two victims. So, yes, it is something that you hear every day. It's something that you never get used to. You kind of go through the motions because you're I hate to say comfortable with it, but as with regard to everybody else, you're the most comfortable with this type of crime. But it's despicable. There's nothing to be said. I'm just grateful. Horrible for the two victims that were found, and grateful for the survivor that's able to come into court and tell the jurors about what happened.
Yeah, and we're going to go right now to the first clip, which is a clip of that survivor's testimony and what happened to her, and a little bit about her story. And then, Stacey, I want to come back and talk to you a little bit more about your experience with these types of victims.